Then the next point, if the government is lying, then they must be behind it. Well, that's also not really true, is it? They could be lying because aliens did it, right? And they're trying to hide the fact that aliens exist. These are just patterns that kind of gesture towards a potential truth, not actually evidence of anything definitive. Just like the hunters hearing a branch break. But our brains like that. We can kind of fill in the blanks and jump to our own conclusions. And that's fine if you just don't want to get eaten by a bear. But if you actually want to know the truth, those shortcuts aren't going to cut it. But what about the first point that we skipped? If jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams, then the official narrative must be false. Well, again, this kind of makes sense at face value, but if you do even a little bit of research, the theory falls apart. While jet fuel doesn't burn hot enough to turn steel beams to liquid, that's not necessarily needed for the structural integrity of the towers to be lessened to a degree that they would collapse. If you've ever seen a blacksmith working on tools, you know that as metal heats up, it becomes more malleable. The sword isn't at melting point, but it clearly isn't as sturdy as it was before it was heated up. So the steel beams don't actually need to reach their melting point in order for the towers to fall. They just need to get hot enough to get all bendy and floppy. Or at least a little bit bendy and floppy. There isn't a specific temperature that the steel beams would have needed to reach in order to become malleable, because they just become more malleable the hotter they get. But it's reasonable to conclude, given the amount of weight the steel beams were holding up, that the steel beams could reach a much lower temperature and weaken enough for the towers to fall. To once again reiterate, I'm not trying to completely debunk this conspiracy theory. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a physicist. I would encourage you to go find someone much more qualified than me to thoroughly debunk this conspiracy. However, what I want to show you is that this conspiracy theory and the pattern that it presents doesn't even consider this possibility. The bedrock of this theory hinges on the fact that the steel beams need to reach melting point in order for the towers to fall. But even just a layman's understanding of how metal works shows that that's not true. Yet jet fuel can't melt steel beams has become this signifier of skepticism